Doug's been in the business, he's always been at the forefront of amateur radio, everything. Slow scan TV, Doug was in the first of it. Anything to do with EME, Doug was in the first of it. He's the first in. He generally gets out when everybody else is doing it because it bores him by that time. But when Doug came to build his big station at his KTH at present, he had to get a special licence because he wanted to use high power, and he was also going to use a big 10 metre dish. So the department insisted that he do all the computations to their satisfaction to prove that he wasn't going to endanger either himself or his neighbours or anybody else around the place. So Doug had to read all the books and had to come up with the calculations. Unfortunately, he knows how to write computer programs. And so he wrote a Butte program that he gradually expanded until it can virtually handle any RF situation in any of the DC to blue light virtually. So Doug's going to explain that to us tonight, how you can use that and what the repercussions of the recent decision by ACMA not to allow higher power on the amateur bands, what all that means. And one of the reasons is that not very many amateurs are fully aware of the the radiation hazards associated with your amateur station. Doug will explain all that to you. Thanks, Doug. Is that enough intro?
That's plenty.
Now, no naughty stories about me.
Oh, yeah. Good evening, gentlemen. I don't know how many times I've stood here, but it goes back to 1975, but it means it's great to come back. By gosh, all these old buggers here now. Look at them all.
You're one of them.
Yeah, that's the scary thing. Yeah, Max and I go back a long way. Thank you. Before I get right into it, and what I'd probably forget is the acknowledgements I'd like to make first. Now, the WIA Spectrum Committee, and first of all, I'd like to pay tribute to Michael Owen. Now, he started the whole thing off, and I like to think he's the founder of the modern WIA. Phil was supposed to be here tonight. Is Phil here?
Not yet.
No. Phil being the president of it, he was the chairman, you might say, of our WIA Spectrum Committee. Roger Harrison, I think we all know Roger. Peter Young, sitting right here. He was an ex-director of the WIA, but more importantly, for something like 20 years, he was the director of the radio frequency management of the ACMA. I was also with the ACMA for 13 years, but I don't think we ever worked together.
Yeah.
Did we? Oh, you were in Canberra. Oh, we took no notice of Canberra.
You were that rowdy mob down the...
Yeah, we were down in... And Noel Higgins. Noel was also ACMA. In my day, I looked after the equipment standards part of central office, and we wrote all the standards. I had type test centres in all states, and Noel happened to be my type test officer in Victoria. Now, there's a lot of experience there, and I'll come to that a bit later on. Now, the first thing I'd like to address is, I'm trying to read this slide on, which makes it a bit hard. This is what I'm going to talk about tonight. The ACMA requirements for the operation of amateur radio, LCD. The impact this requirement has upon all amateur antenna installations in respect to EMR. And why has this been raised again with such importance since the LCD first came in 2003? Peter was one of the instigators, or the instigator, for the development of LCD 2003. Incidentally, I don't know if you can read it, the more friendly term for EMR is EME No one likes radiation. And you'll see it often used, EME in certain publications and EMR and others. If they don't want to scare the living daylights out of people, they call it EME, which upsets the EME crowd. Why the ACMA said no to the HF trial, and I think without me spelling it out, you guys will understand why they said no. The LCD is the Radio Communication License Condition Apparatus License Determination 2003. That's our rules and regs, that's our Bible, as to speak. Now, if I may, how many present applied for an HF high power permit? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Good. How many were asked for a subsequent audit? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh gee, they picked on us, didn't they? How many downloaded the ACMA LCD licence conditions? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, we're doing pretty well. I just want to get a feel. How many here believe they know what the safe distances are necessary for their station antenna to comply? Very good. Very good. We'll see if that really is true later on. But that's excellent. That's what we were trying to get across. Now, we debated whether I'm going to put this in or not. Peter and I thought, no, probably not the right way to do, but this is going to be warts and all, so I'll put it in. I've left it in. Only big stations can cause EMR. Incorrect. We can all exceed mil at 100 watts or even far less. You realise that? Other countries have high power, so why can't we? Yes, some do, but most have very specific and detailed operating requirements. I'll demonstrate these if I have time. We need high power for reliable communication, Vis Darwin, Cyclone Tracy. Now, I took these off discussions on the air and on the various reflectors and so forth. Or maybe, but I was there in 1974 with a 101 and it did good. So don't use that as an argument. Why the WIA sold out to the ACMA. Totally wrong. We did our very best and are continuing discussions with the ACMA on the LCD and H-power, high power matters. To us that have been working so hard for this thing, to hear these comments widely expressed gets right up my nose and everyone else's. It's a lot of baloney, and anyway, I don't really care. That's heard often on 40 metres. Well, that's an opinion that needs a responsible refocusing, in my view. It's not the permitted power that is the real issue. It's not the permitted power that's the real issue. It's the safety requirements that must be met with the power we use. That's the thing we all should get through our noggins. I'll just go through a bit of history that Max never covered, thank goodness. Max was a chief engineer of Radio Australia. He came on after we built it, of course. He gave me the first job to measure the EMR measurements on one of our aerials. We had, 50 element log periodics. We wound the transmitter back to 50 kilowatts. That's about all we can get, because normally they ran 250, although I've seen 520 out of it on CW. And we only used half the log. I spent half the afternoon setting up a Singer field intensity meter, calibrating it. Yeah. Anyone that remembers Singer meters, they know exactly the problems we get into. Anyway, I got it all calibrated. We took it out just before dark and set it up about 100 metres in front of aerial 2 or 3, it doesn't matter. Anyway, I had all the aerials set up and we were all ready to go, and I called the boys to throw the transmitter on. And I don't know if anyone's heard that horrible noise. You know what the horrible noise I'm referring to? That's the ting of a meter hitting the end stop. And the lights, the tail lights on the Ford, we had it set up on the back, glowed a colour, quite an orange colour. We got the living heck out of that place quick smart. Now that was the first time I got involved, thanks to Max. He damn near burnt me. One of the interesting things, and this is just as byplay before we get to the serious stuff, all the new staff we had up there were mainly newly married couples. And of course, they started breeding like rabbits. Now, the interesting thing was, out of 20-odd births, not one was a male. Now, that could be totally coincidence, but I just mentioned that because that's fact. I get involved, as Max indicated, the high power permit back in 1983. Now, I was working for the ACMA, and you might remember Bob Crow, who was in charge of Victoria. Oh, he gave me hell. Anyway, I got it, but that was in the days before the LCD. We had a special thing, and they came out and they tore the place apart, and the blokes that worked for me had great delight in seeing me out. Now, one of the problems was I had to get approval, the costs involved, because I had to get an accredited body to supply the EMR figures for the station itself, and that cost a lot of money. I got that, and when I got the figures and I compared them with mine, they were wrong. So that's what started me writing the EMR. At that time, there was no LCD. Peter hadn't really started on it. But as soon as the LCD came in, my high power permit became null and void because it wasn't covered under the LCD. It didn't really matter too much because I was in the process of moving from Churnside Park to Glenburn. I left ACMA in 1988 and came back into broadcasting. The crash and bang of the circuit breakers and the smell of the ozone was too much to resist. And I looked after VK3UM as far as the broadcasting goes, and we had a staff about 150 odd. But there we ran straight into, in the years I'd been away, the EMR requirements were very, very stringent then. Now, there's two designations, and we'll get to it. The designation of an RF worker and the safety requirements. If you're an RF worker, you can get into higher power fields, and they are designated by the specifications as far as laid down for EMR. When you're an RF worker, you have to have a medical every year, and the medical consists of putting eye drops in your eyes and blinding you for 24 hours, giving you headaches and seeing if you've got any cornea burns. That's basically what it is. They never recorded it, but anyway, we had to go through all that, and that was a hell of a thing, trying to organise 150 staff on shift work to go through and have their eyes done. Of course, all the blokes reckon it was crash hot, they can get 24 hours off. One of the other things is the site radiation folders, keeping them up to date. Now, every site has got a site radiation folder. All the antennas and everything are measured, what's safe, what's not. And when you're running a communal site, it's a hell of a job, because other people are coming in and not doing the right thing. One of the things that used to worry me, I get a phone call at home, and it would be the CFA. And they say, "Who's the clown that put this damn aerial right in front of my nose?" And I wasn't worried too much about the fact that it might be blocking his poor little view, but I was more interested in how much steam was in that aerial. Maintaining calibration of radiation meters was part of our function, and we had temp cells and everything like that. One of the other problems we had the ever-present Liney's disregard for EMR safety. I had blokes up at Channel 2 Mount Dandenong, and used to enjoy on a cold day sitting on the Channel 2 dipoles and getting their bum warm while they're changing the thing, without telling you. So, you know, we haven't lost any EMRs, but through that. I mention this because there is in documentations, if you troll through the web, you'll find that there's a very interesting document by one of the senior doctors in Australia who had a very high position in one of the major companies in Australia, who wrote a big paper on the fact that there was a very high incidence of cancer around Artarmon. Now, you know what Artarmon is? Everyone knows what's there at Artarmon? Yeah, that's where all the TV sites are. And it was linked the fact that because they had TV and high power and everything, it was due to EMR it was causing the trouble. It just so happens that Artarmon was the big cancer clinic for Australia. So that was a bit of a furphy. Oh, just going back to that, while I was working with the ACMA, I was on the ITU IEC committee. That's the International Electro Technical Committee. That was a group worldwide that we used to set the standards for how you test equipment. And one of the big things in my day was how to test the radiation from a mobile phone. In those days it was analogue. And we had to devise a salt head, you might say, is the best way of putting it. Now, in those days, as probably is now, the main players for that was Motorola, Philips, STC, and Nokia. Yeah, you go on and on and on. These are the people that were driving it all. And in those days, I could take a calibrated holiday meter and put it against a mobile phone and put it against a handheld, and I can blow the heck out of both. Now the mobile phone would pass, the handheld wouldn't. Now you tell me about it. Anyway, one of the things we had to do is develop how to work on the equipment we had. And just up the road in Ringwood was where we had our major base station for the workshop and so forth for Victoria. And I had a staff there that we used to repair all the PAs. Now, every PA we worked on, or before we worked on it, we measured. And there was hardly anything over 10 watt PA that didn't exceed mil, maximum exposure level. So, do we as amateurs really know what we're getting into when we're working with high power amplifiers and high gain antenna? I don't think so. Do our magazines warn of the dangers of high power amplifier construction and alignment? Now, as some of you might know, I'm the representative for Dubus here in Australia and New Zealand. And I've had many a discussion with the editors of Dubus because they've been running a series of 1 kilowatt PAs and no indication whatsoever that these things are damn dangerous. I've never measured one, but I'd be prepared to lay firm cash on the fact they're well and truly above mil. Now, what is RFEME? You notice here we are, Australian government. This is the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency. You notice how they call it EME, not EMR. Now, that, I won't read it out, but that's what the definition is straight out of theirs. Does exposure of EMR cause adverse effect to health? And when you read that, it's all to do with mobile phones. Now I ask the question, it's all very well at low level, but what if EMR exceeds the limit? We all know the effects of a microwave oven, how it can cook a chook at 800 watts on 13 centimetres. And the EIRP is easy to generate on 37 centimetres with amateur equipment with a high gain antenna. Does that put it in perspective? I hope it does. So a refresher why EMR is so important. It has the capability to kill or maim you. There's 2 VKs known to have received cornea burns as a direct result of the amateur and or professional careers. Ron Wilkinson, 3 AKCs, a lot of you old timers will know him, and certainly would know Les Jenkins, 3ZBJ. Both, Ron was the first moon bouncer on 1296. He developed these ring amplifiers, he and his wife, and yeah, that's where it came from. And Les, of course, was a pioneer in the triplex system they used to use for cranes and so forth, and that was reasonably high power SHF stuff. So we have a duty by law to comply with all the requirements stipulated up by our licensing conditions. Now, the Australian Communication and Media Authority, ACMA, has the regulatory responsibility to protect the health and safety of persons exposed from RF-EME from radio communication transmitters. In order to fulfil this regulatory responsibility, the then Australian Communication Authority, now ACMA, have adopted the APANSA standards, limits into the radio communication, blah, blah, blah. So the standard is actually controlled or administered by the ACMA. The standard is interesting because in this country, both non-ionising and ionising radiation are controlled under the same crowd. In a lot of countries they're separate. Now this is the standard. As Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency, I can hardly say that. That's their standard. That's the crowd. The requirements are no different to the majority of countries throughout the world. Have you ever known us to develop something new on ourselves? Some countries are even more stringent than ourselves. We operate under Part 3 of the ACMA licence conditions, apparatus licence, determination, blah, blah, blah. That's the licence that you've all downloaded and read. Now, apart from the standard that the APANSA sets, the ACMA have added transmitter power and antenna accessibility requirements, and additional housekeeping requirements as level 1 is not met and level 2 compliance is required. So that's the standard. Now this is the actual standard itself from the SPANDA document. Table 7, if I can use this, can anyone read that at the back? I think you're really troubled. Okay, it's divided in two parts. The top one is occupational and the bottom one is general public. And that's the standard running down that side. Now, that's for RF workers only, and it's roughly about 10 times more than the general public. This is for the general public. Now, the thing I wanted to point out, it's a 6-minute total average, 6-minute average total power. And the units are normally in watts per metre squared. Now that's table 7. There's table 8. This is to do with RMS electric and magnetic fields. Table 8 is peak power. Now, I haven't included that because most of us are not really involved in peak power. Just moving on. Now you might be able to see this now because it's a bit larger. But that's the ICNIRP or the WHO or whatever. This is the one that we follow that is the world standard. Now as far as the power in watts per metre squared, you see at 400 megs, it's 2 and so forth. That's an abbreviation. On the previous document it actually spelt out the frequency ranges and what the limits were. That's what my software uses. It also uses the FCC standard. But, whoops, I'll have to go back. That's the one I wanted. As far as we're concerned, at 400 megs, 2 watts per metre squared. That's the standard. If you happen to be in Russia, it's 0.1. If you happen to be in Italy, it's 0.1, and you can follow the rest down there. So our standard, or the World Health Organization standard, and everyone that agrees that that should be it, but some countries have chosen to be so much lower. Mind you, do the amateurs go along with it? I work a lot of Russians off the moon. So there's a vast difference, as you can see. Now this is straight from the LCD. This is level 1, and I'll read it out. For what? For which the average total power supplied to by the transmitter to all antennas. The transmitter is not more than 100 watts. Each antenna fed by the transmitter installed so that it's inaccessible to the public, or which the bottom of the antenna fed by the transmitter is at least 10 metres above the ground, and the average total isotropic rated power to all antennas is less than 200 watts. What it means, if you're below 100 watts power mean, PM, which I'll explain a bit later as we go into it, that's what you've got to comply with. Basically, I'll go further on that, it's got to be inaccessible to the public. Now these are the conditions if it isn't, which is called level 2.
So that would exclude mobile antennas on motor vehicles?
Sorry?
That would exclude 2 metre antennas and 70 centimetre antennas?
No, it includes all antennas.
No, there's a separate section for mobiles. There's a separate section.
Yes, I'm aware of that. Yes.
That was a question.
But
The previous one, the average, you're talking about average power, you're talking about average over 6 minutes now? Or?
yes, I am. It's also to do with the mode factor as well. We'll come to that. So that's that. But the overriding requirement is contained in the preceding part 3, section 8. And that is, it spells out in words of one syllable, the RF field produced by the transmitter operated under the licence must not exceed the reference levels for the general public exposure at a place accessible to the member of the public. So whatever you do, it can't be accessible to the public.
Hang on, the word is general public.
That includes you.
That includes you and your family.
And that accessibility sort of...
What is that really?
What does accessibility mean?
Public
Doesn't,
fence up to town, that's all fine.
Yeah, where is it? The following are examples of the type of place that is accessible to the member of the general public. A private residence, a public park, a building, a rooftop, blah, 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 blah. So it spells out what it is. Now,
What I was meaning is the legal definition of general public, as David's quite reminded me here, is someone that does not live there. That's the legal definition under the law.
look, I'm not a lawyer, I'm just reading from there.
So can we safely say that a private residence which is securely fenced is not accessible to the general public?
But what about to your own family?
They're not general public.
Are they? Or are they not? I'll summarise this now.
What about the people next door?
Same thing. Exactly. In summary, the antenna height and accessibility to the public. If you run an average total power less than 100 watts PM, then your antenna must be inaccessible to the public. Now, however you define that, I'm not going into that tonight. Or the lowest point has to be a minimum of 10 metres above the ground. That's if the power is less than 100 watts. And, of course, it's got to be less than 3200 watts. That's to meet level 1 criteria. If you run an average power greater than 100 watts PM, then your antenna must be inaccessible to the public, and the lowest point has to be a minimum of 10 metres above the ground. Okay, start roaring. And the total EIRP has got to be less than 3200.
So that's an antenna gain of less than about 14 dB.
It's got nothing to do with antenna gain. It's got to do with the power you're running.
Well, if you put 100 watts times 13 dB, you're going to get your EIRP.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Right. So if you run at 100 watts, you'll be fine as long as your antenna gain is less than about 13 or 14 dB.
Exactly. It goes further than that. It goes back to the very first point I made in the part 3, that you cannot exceed the maximum exposure level. That's where the ACMA have got us. Got everybody. We're no different. You cannot exceed the the maximum exposure level. And as I pointed out earlier, with 100 watts and a high gain antenna, you can certainly exceed that very easily. What does it really mean? There's not really been a change to our licensing requirements. There hasn't, since 2003. It's just our interpretation of the safe distance requirement, and this was revealed during the HF high power permit application trial. That's where it really showed up. I'll now demonstrate the requirements of power and accessibility and the effect, blah, blah, blah. What I had to do to the EMR calculator, and I might say that it was first, I wrote this back in 2001, it was presented to the International EME conference in Prague in 2002, and there was a paper written on it in the whole 9 yards. What I had to do to change to it, and this is where they pulled me up on it, is the fact that I had to add antenna height and accessibility. I took it that if your antenna was 10 metres above the ground, it was all you required, but they want the either or. Now, that's what's available off my website. You can download the calculator. You can get the help file in PDF. The help file is built into that. That's the ACMA document of how to do it. This is the expanded document as well, so you can download the expanded document as well.
Can I ask a question, Doug?
Sure.
So, as I recall, there was comments saying that within that HF trial that there was an error in your program and people used it and come up with values. Are you saying that's the omission the ACMA were saying that it was wrong?
No. What the ACMA were concerned about was the fact that we were not taking into account the accessibility and height. It was available in my software as what is safe and what is not safe, and you'll see why. You don't have to have an antenna at 10 metres height to comply.
Yeah.
That's the fundamental thing. But forget that,
So
that's what they want.
You don't have to have an antenna.
No, I'm saying if you calculate it out, and first principles, the FAR's maximum radiation level, your antenna doesn't have to be 10 metres high, it can be a lot lower and still comply. Now that's the interpretation I made on it at first, and that's when I distributed the software. Am I safe, am I not safe? That was the basis of my software.
Does that mean that every inverted V antenna in Australia, which is probably run by 90% of the hams in Australia, it has its ends down at 6 metres above the fence?
If you're running above 100 watts. Yes.
If you're running 100 watts, it is non-compliant.
No, above 100.
That's not necessarily true.
If you're running above 100 watts, the lowest point of your antenna has to be greater than or 10 metres above the ground.
But that criteria was also on your slide as below 100 watts, was it not?
Yes.
No. It's,
I understood from previous discussions and presentations that, and I take the simple case of an inverted V because it's been common garden for 50 years.
Yeah.
My interpretation of that was that the whole antenna, the lowest point of the antenna had to be 30.
If you're below 100 watts, you have to be inaccessible to the public, full stop. If you're above 100 watts, it's got to be 10 metres above the ground.
And inaccessible.
And inaccessible. That's right. Sorry, if I read it, gave you the wrong impression, I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
So,
Yeah,
I think it's
sorry,
really causing a lot of confusion.
can I just clarify something here for everybody? The most important thing here is it says 100 watts average power. And I'm sure Doug's going to also talk about the form factor of a transmission signal as well.
Yeah, that's coming up right now.
That also comes into it as well.
Yes.
So even though it says that your for example, your well, as I have an FT897D, is capable of a total capable of 100 watts peak. That does not necessarily mean that on SSB it's putting out 100 watts with every transmission.
Yeah, that's where we're just about to come to. Sorry, you had something, Howard?
I just feel on this point about antenna height versus power.
Yeah, we'll go through each of the
is
antennas.
very, very confusing to many, many people at the moment.
Yeah, yeah.
And I can think of all the new F-calls that are out there who don't have the experience that you and a lot of other people in this room have, who are thoroughly confused about this issue at the moment.
Can I sum it up as simply as this? If you run less than 100 watts PM at the antenna, all the parts of the antenna have got to be inaccessible to the public.
So if the ends are 6 metres off the ground, they're
Yeah,
accessible.
they're inaccessible. Yes, they don't have to be 10 metres.
I wish they'd spell it out in the spec.
As far as the LCD is concerned, is the criteria for below 100 watts and greater than 100 watts the same or different?
Below or above.
Yes.
It's different. It's different.
Thank you. That's
Yeah.
different.
No, sorry.
Okay, this is the point we're just about to move on to.
Sorry, Doug, just one more.
Yes, sorry, go.
So you're saying they're determining that by distance and power level, not by the power per metre squared.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter what your power per metre.
Exactly.
You could have that antenna at 3 metres and it's
Exactly.
0.1 and it'd still be illegal.
The Americans do it a different way. And if we've got time, we'll go through that. The American gives an example at each power level what distance the antenna's got to be away. But we don't. We've got this hideous situation between 10 metres above the ground and inaccessible to the public. And that's where the confusion, I can see the confusion all along. Again, I repeat, if the power is below 100 watts PM, the antenna's got to be inaccessible to the public.
But just to help Doug out here, just remember that this LCD, which this is coming from, doesn't only just apply to us, it applies to taxi drivers. It applies to 774.
Oh, everyone.
It applies to the television station. This apparatus license LCD applies to everybody, and that's why it's been written in a generic fashion.
Yeah. It's law. It's law to everybody. The ACMA administers the law. The ACMA have written our LCD and we have to abide by the law. Okay, now this is what I'll demonstrate in actual, when we swap over to the software. In the software you'll see a box called the transmission form factor and the 6-minute period average. And down here, average transmitter power at feed, that is the PM. In this particular case, there's 400 watts. The SSB, a non-processed, conversational mode, happens to be an overall transmission of 20%. So your 400 watts is reduced down to 71 watts. Actually, it's a bit more than that because there's a half a dB of transmission loss I've included in it. So that's the figure, that's the 100 watt breakpoint figure that we're looking at. So if you're running 400 watts SSB, conversational mode, you're going to be well below 100 watts. And that's the way it was set up. That's why we're allowed 400 watts PEP and 125 watts CW. And that's why a lot of people believe that WSJT can run 400 watts. Wrong. It's 125 watts. Okay, moving on. I'll demonstrate that it's easy to see to actually flick the boxes and watch it happen. Here's an example. If less than 100 watts PM and inaccessible to the public, then a 10 metre minimum antenna height is not required. This box here in the software tells you whether it's level 2 is required or not. Again, you can see 400 watts, 70 watt less transmission loss is only 71 watts, so it complies. That's that one. We'll move to the next. Here's an example now that you throw your processor on. You're running 400 watts in theory, bingo, it jumps to 178. Now you're above 100 watts. Now you've got to have your antenna a minimum of 10 metres above the ground by just pressing a button. It's gone stunned silence, hasn't it?
Just a question on your...
Yeah, that's the cold hard facts. Don't shoot the messenger.
I'm not trying to shoot.
No.
No, it's great. I just question about the safe distance down there.
I'm coming to that. I know what you're going to say.
Is that the hypotenuse, or is it at ground level that's the safe distance?
The safe distance I calculate is, again, first principles. It's the height of the antenna, the 3 dB point of the actual gain of the antenna, and the hypotenuse of that.
So, the hypotenuse to ground level, or to...
Or whatever. No, it's a safe height, at the height that I set. We'll demonstrate that, and you can see exactly how it works, because I know Howard's still confused on what's all about, so hopefully we can unconfuse a lot of people. But the point I made on this particular slide, just by literally going from non-process to process SSB, you've jumped to 50% overall transmission, and that brings the power up to 170 odd watts. But the net result from that is, of course, your antenna height has got to go to 10 metres. Now here's the example that you were just about to raise.
Hang on. Your antenna only needs to go above 10 metres for level 1 criterion.
Yes.
You can, as I said, and this is, I know where you're heading here, you can go into level 2 criterion, which requires exclusion zones.
Yes.
I know that's where you're coming to.
Yes. This is where we come into the next one, where you've got to prove, if you go to level 2, that you are safe. And that's the hard part to the amateurs. And that's where I got involved when the WIA approached me and said, can we use your software to make it easier for A, the hams, and B, for the ACMA, to be quite candid.
Here's the next question. How many of the chief wallers in the ACMA have anything other than a business administration degree? And how many of them have anything other than a 4th grade science?
No idea. And I'm not addressing that. No. That's not my bag. I'm just trying to keep the Ohm's law tonight, please.
And under the new government, you'll soon be less.
Okay, here's the situation. 432 megs. What are we running? We're running 400 watts sideband, single Yagi, and that's nothing special. 14 dB is nothing special. Only 71 watts average. We've exceeded 3200 watts EIRP, and we require level 2 compliance because we've gone over 3200 watts. That means that the antenna's got to be 10 metres above the ground, as we've already discussed. But note what the safe distance is. If the antenna's height is at 4.13 metres, it's safe. There's the problem we've got with the LCD. Once it's a belt and braces approach where it's got to be 10 metres, but you get other situations where it can be at 10 metres and exceed MEL at 10 metres. This is where the real problem arises, and this is why the ACMA say you have to comply with the EMR requirements and leave that for you to work out.
Yeah, because they don't know themselves.
Comply with the LCDs.
Look at
10 metres.
Yeah, well, it's easy for professionals. You just get out your holiday meter or your meter and measure it. We can't.
I had a query the other day where one of the guys was saying he was confused by the terminology of tower height in relation to a dipole, which he's got hanging between 2 gum trees, and the feed point is a lower point than the 2 ends. How does he get on there, and how do you make that interpretation? And in case of the dipole, is the 2 ends, the feed point, everything has to be above?
It's dead simple. You keep below 100 watts. That's the only answer I've got. Because you get into the case of a GF5RV, you can say the actual transition point is probably safe on 40. You go to 21 megs and it's a voltage point and it's unsafe. This is the problem we've got. But the point, I'll go back to that. even though the ACMA stipulates in the LCD with the antenna height has got to be a minimum of 10 metres, and New South Wales immediately runs headlong into a problem there because the building regulations don't permit that. It's an absolute can of worms, but when you actually measure or calculate the actual radiated or the safe distance, then you find that it's actually less than the 10 metres required. Okay, the exclusion zone is 10.807 metres. That's the on-axis exclusion zone. That means the actual bore site. If you're standing in front of the antenna at eye level for the antenna, in other words, above whatever that height is, 4.13 metres, you're right in the beam, and you've got to be more than 10 metres away. But if you have got the safe height, which I'll come back to in a minute, is at 2.5 metres or whatever it is, you're going to be below it and you're going to be safe. So you can get within 4.3 metres, contrary to the regulations which says you've got to be 10 metres away. But that is the law, 10 metres. That's what we as the Spectrum Management Committee are trying to work with the ACMA to actually make it completely rational and stop all these questions we're getting tonight. Sir?
So you would say that for level 2 compliance you need to have the antenna above 10 metres, so your program...
Level 1.
Level 1, apologies, but you're saying that the safe height is at 4 metres there, I can see, so they're saying that the 10 metre height limit is just to account for idiocy or foolproofness?
Yes, that's right.
It was a catch-all.
Yeah, it's a catch-all, as Peter just said. The difference between level 1 and level 2. Level 1's cut and dried. If you're below 100 watts, below 3200 watts EIOP, no worries. Once you go to level 2, you have to prove you're safe. And that includes the height of the antenna and the whole 9 yards.
You start at level 1.
You stay at level 1. Okay, if we can swap over to the software we can actually try out. I want to demonstrate exactly what the mode factor is and how it affects power mean. If I can, I'll just demonstrate some of the features on it. Thank you. Oh, getting old. The help file, if you click on that, you've got a full range of help. You can open that up and everything's in the help file. The on-screen hints button, as you move around the actual screen, you actually see I'll disable the hints. As you've seen, no. If you move around there, it will give you a yellow box of what that actual function does. Now, after a while, when you get used to it, it annoys you, so you can turn it off. That's what the hint button does. The multiplier button, I'm afraid the colours aren't too great, but when you put a multiplier button by 10, whenever you increase the variables here and here, it actually goes up to a factor of 10 and not 1. So that's a little feature. Now, this is what people were just wanting to know about what PX, PY and PZ are. Now these are the ITU regulations or definitions. The one we're concerned with is PX. So read that, and I won't go through that tonight, but you read that and you understand what we're about. That there is the PX. Now, watch it change. Currently we're on sideband. We've selected 400 watts. I've done it this way so it's quick to actually select instead of using a up-down sort of thing. If I go to CW, first of all, see the overall transmission factor, 20%. I hit CW and it goes to 40%. And immediately we go to 143 watts. That's why we can't run 400 watts on CW. That's why it should be 125.
Doug, is that assuming a 6 minutes fully transmission?
Yep, there's the 6 minute average.
That's assuming you're transmitting for that whole 6 minutes.
That is what they call definition of conversational. the definitions are also in the documents as well. They've defined what conversational is, and that's the one that's normally used. I've actually added others and a variable thing that if you want to actually do something indifferent, that you can actually change your overall transmission factor by what you're actually transmitting. It could be, well, it mightn't be over 6 minutes. You could be transmitting over 10 minutes. And you can gain a lot out of that because you're not transmitting, you haven't got an average period that is as high as what you're normally in that. See, the interesting thing is, as soon as you go to, I'll go back to the 400 watts, I've picked 400 watts as a default for SSB. If I go to SSB, processed, immediately you go to level 2. I'll go back to 125 watts CW, and what are we doing? Yeah, 125 watts CW, it's 45 watts PM. So you're miles below the requirements. You could argue, if you went up to say 200 watts, to 250, you're still under 100 watts. So this is the idiosyncrasies in the LCD. We could in fact run a lot more power than we do and still comply with the LCD. But it's as Peter said earlier, it's a catch-all situation. So that's if you're running CW. That's 80 watts. It's actually a bit less than that. If I, hang on, I'll reduce that to zero loss. It's actually 90 watts. You can see why the two tie in very closely, just a little bit more that the ACMA has sort of added. And that's fair enough. That was an easy way around it. If you go to FM, for instance, 225. That's at 200 watts, of course. If I go back to 125 watts, then, yeah, we have actually, where are we? The average is, what am I doing? Sidebands,
antenna attenuation,
yeah, I better.
And some TDKX in there.
Because you can exceed it. This is the whole thing. It's a can of worms. The further you go into it and play with this, the more problems you'll have.
So what happens if we put 100 watts SSB unprocessed and change the antenna height to 9.9 metres?
What do you want? 100 watts?
SSB.
100 watts SSB, which we're doing.
Uncompressed.
Yeah.
And now drop your antenna height to 9.9.
Well,
over the left.
Yeah. You don't have to.
No, in the left-hand box.
That.
No, over the left-hand side where you've got the ability to change your antenna height. 10 metres.
This is where you change the antenna height.
What about on the left-hand side, on the box that's got up-down arrows? Just go to the left, to the left, to the left. To the left.
No, that's the length of his transmission cable, 10 metres.
That's 10 minutes of the actual height. That's the antenna height. But you don't have to be there.
Okay, go to 9.9, that's what I'm saying.
You still don't have to have it. Wait on. Average power 18 watts. Level 2 is not required. It's still safe.
It seems to be different from what I had.
See,
Take out the half dB, you've got that.
oh, I take out the half dB. See, the safe tower height is actually 2.54, which is equivalent to access to the public.
So, your program, to my mind, indicates that we can have various antenna combinations and power levels and fall well within the designated.
Correct.
requirement. Doesn't this make an absolute nonsense of the part of the results of the ACMA's reasons?
Look, I wouldn't use the word nonsense. Not here.
Well,
But It's something we need to revise. You're right.
Yeah. This says that we, with a bit of common sense, can be quite safe.
Yeah.
And one of the main reasons that the ACMA have indicated to us that the reason that they didn't approve the high power.
Well, the reason was people didn't understand what the safe distance was.
And we basically weren't safe.
Yeah.
Which is not true, I put to you.
Good on, John.
Well, I'm not going to get into that, but that was their decision.
Yeah, I understand.
And
I understand. I'm not shooting the messenger here, you.
Yeah. You've read what Roger said, and he spelled it out in words of one syllable.
Yeah. I've used your calculator on all of my antennas at home, and with a reasonable description of inaccessibility,
Yeah.
I couldn't find a problem with any of my antennas.
That would be mostly the case.
You know, and I think most of us are going to fall into that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think you've got to use the swimming pool analogy for the accessibility.
Yeah.
They define what accessible is.
Yes. Well, that is
Anything you can get to.
Yeah. That's defined in the LCD.
Fence up.
Yeah. Max has just raised the. Max has just raised the question about what is inaccessibility. And that's one of the discussion points, but we don't need to because they describe it in the LCD, what inaccessible is to the public. Anyway, moving just along, we'll go up to, the colours are a bit hard to see here, but I've swapped it over to VHF. And in this particular case, I assume I'm using the parabolic reflector. Yes, I am. Now, in my particular case, just that if I'm using 1/500 on 432 CW, safe distance from the tower is 81.55 metres. That's at a safe tower height of that. If I increase the tower height up to 6 metres, I'm perfectly safe. But putting a 10-metre dish 6 metres above the ground is a little bit of a challenge.
What about verticals, like say a vertical on 160 where the bottom part of the vertical may be a foot or so above the ground?
Yes, this is another thing. A vertical on 160 at ground level with its radials, and you're running 100 watts, it has to be inaccessible to the public. If it goes above 100 watts, I don't know. You just have to go by that.
I ran the numbers though, and I did mine, it was about a metre.
Reflection, you'll notice there's an option. Unfortunately, the colours are terrible here and you can't see what's going on. I can turn ground reflection on and off. Now, ground reflection is a standard requirement for the FCC. The FCC have got all their limits and so forth with a ground reflection. No one's whispered in the ACMA's ear about ground reflection yet. Shush. But it should be taken into account. As I mentioned to you in an email, on 432 and 1296, I've never heard ground reflection, even on a flat surface. It must exist. The reverse to that is if you're getting ground reflection, it works in both directions. 144, sure. You can get ground reflection there, but 432, it's very, very critical with the angle involved. But the simple answer is we don't include ground reflection. Hallelujah, brother. But the Yanks do. Now the Yanks have got, I don't know if I've got time to actually show you how the Yanks in there, they've got a document called OET 65B. Of course, that's not. Yeah. Each band, they got a table, and on it is, I think it starts at 100 watts and ends up at 1.5 kilowatts, and it's all PEP, and they tell you what the safe distance is. How simple is that? But on top of that, if I just flick over to the FCC, if I just click on FCC,
they close down until they get money.
thanks for mentioning that, because I'll give you a demo of the I'll give you a demo of the
That's the way we used to do it. And that's where that standard comes from.
Whatever is right and whatever is wrong, we're bound by the WHO, we're bound by a SPANDA, and that's the way it is.
Oh yes, of course. That's the explanation as to the reason why.
But that gives you an example of the difference between the FCC, I can't even see the screen here, and us. If you go down to say 7 megs, it's 2.78 for Australia and 32 point that, but as soon as you go up higher, the two come together. We're 2.2 and that's the FCC, and Australia is 2. So they gradually come together. But remember what I said earlier. Remember a microwave oven. You know the frequency they operate on in the 13 centimetre band, and they run about 800 watts to a kilowatt. Well, we can generate that. Well, I'm not going to dangle my doodle in front of my dish just to prove whether it's true or not. Well, we can. Sorry about that. Edit that out, please. Hang on, Dave's got something.
Sorry, in light of the microwave test day coming up, could you just run a test on 10 gig, 7 watts, 33 dB?
Oh, yeah.
See whether I have to bring.
You can do it yourself, but we'll do it. All right, okay, here we go. Okay. Oh, I can see it here instead of worrying about that. We're looking at 10 gigs. What sort of power would take a kilowatt?
7 watts.
7 watts.
And 33 dB.
What size is the dish?
What was it? 600
mils.
0.6.
0.6.
0.6, okay, I'll come down to 0.6. Look, I haven't explained near and far fields.
haven't got all that.
Well, that was another question. Have you ever done any comparisons with this and that?
Yeah.
Neck 4 or something?
See, in my particular case, because of the size of the dish, I'll just explain it very briefly. The bigger the dish, the larger the surface area, the lower the radiation. Therefore, the gain goes up, but the actual power that's coming off the dish is smaller, inverse square law. So where David's going to be a bit worried about, I don't know if he's going to burn the heck out of things, but here we are, we've got a 0.6 metre a dish, and we'll take it down to a ground level. Safe, where are we? A safe hit. Safe distance, oh, you're pretty right. Now hang on, what sort of loss?
But just for the person that made a comment about comparing this to NEC, the simulations that I've done compared to this are bang on.
So what's the answer to that to read?
Actually, we're talking carrier, so...
You commenting about the E&H planes?
Isn't the FM...
Yeah, well, those figures I provide there, and they're spot on the money. Absolutely spot on. Well, they've got to be. It's bloody Ohm's law and all said and like.
FM.
Put on FM, Doug.
It should be
carrier.
Go to voice FM.
Voice FM, hang on. Where are we? Up here.
You're running steady carrier, voice FM.
Okay.
And the key one is the on-axis exclusion zone.
It's 10.76. Yeah, there you go.
What's the answer? 10 metres.
10.76. So when he's got it on, don't walk in front of it. So that's what we're playing with, guys.
Just go down to 1 watt.
Go down to 1 watt? Okay, 1 watt. 3.04 metres. See, it's all very revealing once you do the sums, or click the buttons in this particular case. And you can, it's a bit of a shock to you if you haven't been playing with this before.
Oh,
Yes, sir.
Doug, would you mind running a mobile phone, please, in the 850 meg band?
Yes, I noticed before you had...
I think you said yeah.
I was going to ask that question.
No.
Watts per metre at 200 megs was 2 watts per metre squared. And the higher frequency, about 600 or 800 megs, had 4 something watts per metre.
Yes, it does.
I picked that up, so I would have thought the higher frequency would have been more dangerous.
Yeah, but again, it's the square rule as far as what the power effects on the human tissue or the SAR. Just one point that you mentioned there that I was going to. I haven't included ground. Hang on. This is 1 watt. Now we're putting ground reflection. Currently it's 3.04. Now it's 6.51. So there's an anomaly. There's anomalies everywhere. Now we've got to live with it for the time being. But believe me, Peter and the rest of us are trying hard to work with the ACMA to get it sorted out. Now, the dealings I've had personally, my personal impression with the engineers we've been talking to, switched on, they know their stuff, they're very reasonable sort of blokes. They understand the situation they're in and we're in. It's just the fact that at that time they've got a change of government and you're in a situation where they couldn't do terribly much. And honestly, I would have made the same decision. I would have said no, because what we're hearing over the air, and they can listen too, as well as we can, and the comments that have been made, that it was obvious that people didn't know what the safe limits were. And this is why I'm here tonight, and others around the country are instilling it into you. So next time we we get a high power permit, we'll all be G'd up and it will sail through like a beauty and everyone will be safe and we won't be hurting people. See, you consider that. If you're a government and you license someone at a certain power and that power's capable of hurting people, how do you think you'll get on? Mobile. All I can say is if you're going to operate, make sure you haven't got someone leaning over your bumper bar, because we have to comply with the limits of it, and you can work out with a vertical whip and the power you're running what the safe distance is. The same thing goes with a taxi and everything else. It's we're into diabolicals because they've licensed everybody, but they're hanging the hat on the fact they put it back. The licensee has to comply with the RF radiation regulations.
How do they cope with a rear stay antenna on a yacht running 100 watts just next to the steering wheel?
Well, they swim out. And they
It's a classic example.
Oh, I've had classical examples. When you work in the field, I gave you that example deliberately to start off with when we did the first measurements of Radio Australia. We heard the cling of the meter going hard over and the bloody tail lights came on. How do you feel?
Warm.
You want to tell them?
He caused it.
You want me to tell them about the note you left for me the next morning?
Yeah, tell them that.
Oh, it's all right. I got to work this morning and there was a note on the desk and Doug gave me the results of the test and he said, the brown stain marks the spot where I was standing.
Yeah, true. Well, is there any more? We could go on all night. Yes, sir.
If we get another trial, is it beneficial that we all apply for it?
Yeah, why not?
If more people
Why not?
apply, or less,
Let's face it.
I didn't apply because I was never planning on running.
Yeah. Well, let's face it. Just one little thing. Think this out. Everyone that's got a linear, they got your address.
Just on the trial again. Just on the trial, not quite on topic, but will the ACMA take on board next time that sort of a lot of amateurs were very reluctant to front up Joe to be part of this trial?
Yeah. Look, what you're saying and what Roger's written in AR, we're all disappointed. But how do you
ACMA realised that there were issues with the trial, with the processes of the trial.
Yeah.
They acknowledged that. I was at the Redcom's conference yesterday in Sydney and speaking to Alan Major and Maureen Carl and the people at the top of ACMA, the top level, they acknowledged that there were shortcomings in the process of the trial. They are quite happy for us to have another one, but they want to see a higher level of awareness within the ACMA community about the sort of issues that Doug's talking about. And if we can demonstrate that, we can go straight into another trial and we have a very good chance of being successful.
Well, I think the first way, and I think many people know, I won't mention the particular name, but actually when I rang up on the 30th of January, which is the day the letters were stamped, and I asked would they accept this particular tool, the person in charge said there were issues with it. I think the first thing and the most important thing for the ACMA community is actually to get this particular tool accepted and recognised by the ACMA now. Good.
It has now. I took out a few little wobblies. One little thing I like to show you there that I've added in the last couple of days. When you're playing with this and comparing apples with apples, you can't. But there's one little feature down here. If I click on that, you'll see the designator. You can set it as watts per metre squared, milliwatts per centimetre squared, or microwatts per centimetre squared. So you can actually, if I click on that, the display there is in microwatts to centimetre squared. Because a lot of the radio phone towers and so forth, all their measurements are in microwatts to centimetre squared. So I added that just because I was double checking things and seeing where we comply. So if you've got any issues with this, please let me know. If I can simplify it.
Is it the ACMA saying that this program satisfies them 100%? Because the letter I get say the measurements you carried out are in so and so, but it doesn't mean your station's compliant or not.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say.
It's suitably vague to say that, yeah, you've done all the tests that you have to do, and we're satisfied with the tests that you've done. We're happy with the assessment.
Yeah.
But it doesn't say whether it complies or not.
I think as an amateur fraternity, we want to rule the line out of it. Forget what happened in the past. Start from scratch.
Yeah, well,
the software is acceptable.
Does it say that on the ACMA side?
You've got that from ACMA, have you? Or in writing?
Well, we have.
Oh, we've got it in emails.
Yeah, we have.
Look, make a clarification here. The issue for performing calculations, there was no issue. What their issue was the inclusion of whether it's level 2 compliance or level 1 compliance. It was the statement. And that's
not even mentioned in the Act. It's level 1 criteria, level 2 criteria.
Yeah.
Why are we adding words in that aren't there?
Well, that's in the LCD.
No, it's not. You have a look at the LCD. It talks about level 1 criteria.
Yes.
It doesn't say compliance.
Same thing.
Well, okay, it's the compliance with level 1 criteria. Splitting hairs. But the evaluation of the trial was just not on the calculations that everybody provided. It included station inspections. And in fact, station inspections over a number of, well before the trial even started, because during these inspections, questions were asked about what do you understand by this? That it was just the general perception of people's understanding. Not that there was anything wrong with the calculations, it was people's interpretation of what.
Remember,
and there was very.
Can I make a suggestion? As an examiner, in the last, I've been doing it for about 20 years. I have never ever seen one question about what's in the LCDs.
Yep.
Any understanding of the LCD.
Okay.
We're down now.
That particular aspect of the LCD.
Yeah, okay, that has been rectified. We have now been working on a new regulatory syllabus. It's with the ACMA at the moment for their final tick-off. And once we get that final approval, and it will include elements for EMR, but it also covers a wider view of legislation in general. So that was 18 months' work. Okay, that's for the future. Now, the other thing that the ACMA, at our debrief, as it were, with them, APANS are reviewing the standard. So they don't want to do anything precipitous until such time as the APANS standard has gone through. And it will now include, we believe, a section on persons of short stature.
But that's all well and good. But as I've raised on numerous occasions, the APANS standard costs $265 to access. That document, which we can pull up on the internet, sorry, it's timed out there, is not the APANS standard that it links to. That is just... The APANS standard is a free download. No, it's not.
No, it's not. All you do is
The APANS standard can only be downloaded from SII Global at $265.
Excuse me, you go to www.VK3UM.com and you click on that button and you'll download it for free.
Free.
And you can, there's nothing, originally I had to pay $30 odd to get the standard. And now it's available free. It is free.
If you want to buy the printed version, you have to fork out money.
You have to fork out that money, but you can download it and print. Just to conclude, thanks Peter. Now, he was the man that did the LCD in the first place. So, well... rebuttal.
That apparatus...
One of the things that the ACMA may mention with regarding the trial was the limited number of people that actually applied for the trial.
And we've addressed that.
We know that.
We know that. And
I'd like to point out, or I'd like to suggest, that this may have been brought about by a couple of things. As I said, the reluctance to put the hands in the money for $49.
Have you read your AR this month?
But also a perception that the amateurs didn't trust the ACMA. This is something the ACMA needs.
100%.
Okay. Look, I'm not defending the ACMA. What I'm saying to you is we provided this sort of information up front at the beginning of the trial, saying the appropriate number or approximate numbers. We said 400 to 450 people Australia-wide. Okay.
I like to finish off. Now remember, on the very second slide I put up, in the blue I said, does everyone here understand what their radiation limits are for their aerials? Now that was a key question, and that was the answer really that I was trying to get across tonight, that where we failed, well, the ACMA believe we failed, because we didn't know the compliance required for our distances. Now I hope the talk tonight you'll get a better understanding of what the ACMA is looking for, what you have to do, and when it comes around next time around, you can all apply and all do the right things in accordance with the book. And that way we can't miss.
So we're all on the same page.
One final question.
Just one final statement. Who do we have to lobby to change over to something like the American system?
Well, that's what we're working on now. I don't know the outcome to that. There's more holes in the LCD than there is in a colour. There's so many ambiguities. You've seen them all tonight. You've all recognised a lot of them. I've just gone over them. The bottom line is the law is the law. We've got to comply. If you step out of line, it's not going to do us any good at all. Peter was in the game for 20 odd years. I was in the game for 13 odd years. We sat on the other side of the table to the WIA people in those days. I got out of the EMDRC because I was involved in amateur, and it wasn't looking appropriate that I represent both sides of the fence when I was working for the ACMA. It's different now, but all the time in those days the WIA operated in an entirely different way than it does today. I like to believe we've got experience that we can push forward what we all want And I'm sure with the help from the ACMA, we'll achieve it. But it ain't going to happen overnight. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks very much, Doug. I'm sure quite a few questions were answered. Now, before you sit down, just on behalf of the club, I know you've got one of these, but
I haven't got one of them.
No. This is, I'd like to thank you for giving up your time tonight, driving up from Tickaluna. What suburb is that?
Tickaluna, it's Aboriginal for House on the Hill. We kept it that way for 2 years before we let them know it's actually a backwards lunatic.
Thanks very much, Doug.
Thank you.
All right, so we're all go home tonight and download the calculator, load it up, and tomorrow do some antenna work. Yeah, now.
Switch and watch the lights.
Oh yeah. Would you like to come up and say a few words, Phil? I know you've said a few words from down the back. You want to
Very briefly.
say a few words? Welcome to the meeting. Anyway, I don't know what happened to you tonight. You must have lost your mind.
I'm sorry to be here so late. It's a matter of not being able to be in 5 places at the same time. But my day started about 4:30 this morning in Sydney, and I was at the RAD conference yesterday in Sydney. And you know, the thing I did take away from that RAD conference is we believe it or not, the top people at ACMA are good. They do see amateurs in a very good light now, and no matter what people may have happened 10, 15, 20 years ago, we now do have a very good, robust relationship with ACMA, and we have sent them a fairly stern or robust reply to the outcomes of the high power trial. I was speaking to them yesterday, and they are expecting to go ahead with another trial sometime in the future, but they do want to see increased awareness through the amateur community about EMR issues, and I think that's pretty fair enough. Their compliance, 2 compliance levels, I think you have to understand, are a very, very simplified set of equations that people can inspect a station quite easily and determine whether there's a degree of risk. They're not necessarily based in hard science, and that's what they've put in place, and that's what we have to comply with, whether we may like it or not. I'd like to thank Doug very much for his work on this. Doug came in virtually out of the blue at pretty short notice, and has done a fantastic job on the calculator. The changes that were made to the calculator, although ACMA said the calculator was lacking in some respects in its earlier version, the changes were extremely minimal and made only a couple of 100 mils difference to the distance calculations. So I think Doug fixed that, I think, virtually overnight, and ACMA accepted that within a few days, and it's all gone very well. So I'd like to thank Doug very much for his work on this. I think it's really really fantastic of you, Doug. Very much appreciated. Now, as far as the WIA is concerned, of course, we can always do a better job. I've spent today with some of the office staff. That's where I was tonight, and at lunchtime today, in between my tribulations with the NBN, and the office is going really well. We've got some plans for the WIA office, which we hope will make it a little bit more proactive and responsive to your needs. It's come a long way in the last few years, and I think we can improve the WIA quite a bit from where it is now going forward. It's quite an exciting period in amateur radio. It's got some pretty significant challenges with an ageing population, and challenges of relevancy in a modern world. And I think we've got a few ideas that we're developing that'll take amateur radio forward into the next 50 or 100 years. So it can continue going on, and I hope to have more to say about that on some other occasion. Anyway, thanks very much. Any questions? Happy to take them, maybe over a cup of coffee. I know some of you want to get home pretty quickly, so any questions, come and talk to me. I've got a pretty thick skin, so you can ear bash me as much as you like. Thanks very much.